Okay, so after my first video on the Stop Killing Game initiative, I did my homework. I looked through the EU laws, I looked through how this whole EU initiative stuff works, and of course I did watch more videos from Ross as well, because I think it is important to hear Ross out. And the Q&A that Ross posted did answer a lot of my questions, and it did align with what I read from the EU's website as well. So knowing all that, and looking at my comment section in the previous episode of this thing that Thor posted, I did learn a lot, so we are going to go into this with that in mind, and with that in mind that I am going to sign the initiative. Because what Ross said and how he looks at this thing does make a lot of sense to me. And I do think Thor should be more constructive and reach out to them to help them to make this happen instead of what he's doing right now. But I do want to see what he says in this video, in the Stop Killing Games episode 2, I guess that's what we should call it. So we are going to get into this, we are going to watch the whole thing, and of course at the end I'm going to tell my opinion on it and as a summary. So if you just want to hear the opinion, skip to the end. And in addition, at the end, after my summary, I want to say like 2 things that I think it's important that it should be included in this whole initiative. Okay, let's get into this.
Hi, my name is Jason Thor Hall, also known as Pirate Suffer, and the other day I put out a video called Stop Killing Games, saying why I would not support the initiative. Overall, it was actually quite positive. The analytics on it show that people really think it's a good idea. There's a huge amount of like ratio, and I received hundreds of comments from developers thanking me for putting it out.
The like ratio is, of course, is going to be good, because he is in that developer community, and he talks for them, mostly, with his community, so I don't think that's, like, relevant.
They can't speak publicly while they're at a business or a
That's
job
true.
elsewhere. A lot of the times, major companies will fire you if
True.
you are speaking out of
Fair.
turn and cause a PR disaster for those companies. And since this is such a popular thing among players, most devs aren't going to say anything to you. So I am. So let's discuss the most common requirement of the initiative, which is games have to be left in a functional, playable state. Now, what happens if that game is a online-only live service game? Well, if you want that to stay in a functional, playable state, that means the devs have to release either server binaries or somehow carve off the game to be a single-player experience now.
Yes,
Some way to keep it functional and playable, right?
I feel like if it's a multiplayer game, carving up to be a single player is not something that's relevant, and I don't think, from what Ross said, they don't mean that, because if there is a playability of the game in a single player mode, and if there is single player components to the game, that is different. But if it's a multiplayer game, they will not require you to make it a single player game. And even if the documents and the whole initiative is vague, it is vague for a reason, it is vague for bargaining reasons, it is vague because it is just a raw draft. And through the whole process, it is going to get more specific, especially when it gets in front of EU lawmakers that are going to go through the whole thing. There is so much space and time to make changes and put in additions that this is not something that we should be worried about. That's what I gathered from what I learned so far.
Now, many of you are requesting, yes, I should get the server binaries so that I can go and make private servers for this. But that doesn't make a lot of sense in the real world. And the reason why is because it leaves developers open to abuse. So let's explore that a little bit. Let's say that you made your own video game, and you made a live service game. Maybe it's an MMO, maybe it's something else, right?
Okay.
And let's say that I want to monetize that game, but you don't allow monetization of the game by any other party. This makes sense because most creators don't allow for that. You can't just take someone else's art and profit off of it. Normal, right? So then I go, well, how am I going to force you to do this? Under this initiative, you would have to release the server binaries or keep the game in a functional, playable state at end of life. So I hit you with a ton of bots. I hit you with a ton of exploits. I attack your community. I destroy your Reddit. I go after your business. I go everywhere that I possibly can to make this cost as much as it possibly can for you. And it's not hard to do this.
This is definitely something to worry about, and this is definitely something that is possible. And I feel like game developers have to combat this anyways. And for this specific attack, for this exact reason to not to happen, there is definitely going to be things included when it gets to the level of being law drafted out of this thing. So worrying about this is fair. This is something that is fair from a developer perspective, because this scenario can and probably will happen in some shape or form. And I'm pretty sure something like this definitely already happened. Private servers in general are not really any risk to the original game. Silk Road Online still runs to this day, and there is a million private servers, because a private server is never going to have the same amount of developers, money behind them, and everything like that that a developer team can have. So they're not going to be able to deliver on quality and quantity and anything on the same level as a true developer studio could. But of course you can make the argument that what if this is a developer studio too? Okay, fair. But if this is a developer studio, then we can get them through legal channels, and then we can sanction them through law, and with law we can just ban their game anywhere. Like, for example, we can ban them from banking system in the EU if we caught something with this. And VPN is not going to save you there, because if you are banned for EU or US citizens to buy stuff from you on their US or EU bank accounts, those motherfuckers are not going to make you a bank account in the Cayman Islands or whatever. They ain't. It's just not realistic to do. So we can legally put up walls to prevent this. Or not to prevent this, but to make a dilemma, because you always, if you wanna counter something, you always make your enemy a dilemma, not a problem. And have to make them calculate the risk and reward ratio of doing this, because maybe they can spend I don't know how much money to do this to you, to a developer that made a game, but what they get in return if there is a law against these things, if they can go under investigation and everything like that. It is certainly easy to get bots, get exploits, make the community toxic. Of course people can do that. But what they can get in return on how easy to do this can be a deterrence against this. And the laws put in place against these things. And that is something that Thor should be working towards too. That these kinds of things that he brings up in here, and I guess this is what we are going to talk about, the live service games, then say that to them. Make them put it into law. Come to a solution. Try to find a solution. That's what you should be focusing about. Because we understand and see this problem, but because this problem is there, that doesn't mean the rest of the problems such as go away that we have with games. Like we have with Ubisoft and all that just want to release single player games as live service. Come on.
We saw the exact same thing happen in TF2 recently.
Oh yeah.
Massive amount of bots that were attacking the game. This is not infeasible. This is something that is very easily attainable today. And let's say,
honestly speaking, if it was easily attainable, I think we would have seen this more, way more, especially when we have so many games where people are really unhappy about the state of the game. We had War Thunder. We had like a review bombing. That's the only thing we could do. That's what we did. So Gaijin released the roadmap and started changing things. But there was no bot attack, there was no exploits, there was no whatever used. But the community came together and tried to get them to change stuff. And for example, even when we see a Genshin Impact, they have a really damn unhappy community. None of them are doing this. There's literally like no place for this to do. Because I think developers in general are already preparing for these things. So if you already have an infrastructure that is meant to stop these exploits, stop these cheats, stop these whatevers, then you already have the first line of defense. And for that defensive line, we have to put more laws and everything, more consequences around it. So people on the other side are not even think about this, because there is so many walls to go through that is just not worth it. That's what we have to achieve. And those are the solutions Thor should be thinking about here.
That this goes on long enough that your game dies because you can't afford it anymore, and your studio has to shut down. At end of life, you now have to release those server binaries to keep the game in a functional playable state.
Yeah.
At which point I take those, I create a private server, and I monetize it. Some people have said, well, simply don't allow monetization of the server. Well, who's going to enforce that? If you want a government...
Law is going to enforce that. That's it. Law is going to enforce that. I think that is such a stupid thing to say in a way, because that's why we have governments, that's why we have law, that's why we have systems in place for this to be for these things to be enforced. That's the reason. I mean, if you can, like, what I recently learned, there's a reason there are no Final Fantasy XIV private servers. First of all, they are generally happy with the current state of the game, but there are some players that wanted to make private servers. But those private servers were shut down, shot dead. There are a bunch of private servers in WoW that were shot dead. So there is already a legal framework to shut these things down. There's already precedent where private servers are getting shut down. And for example, if people are trying to make content out of it, and today's world, streaming a game or playing a game and all that, that's where games can get really, really popular, when it's in the mainstream media and when people can see it. YouTube can set up a system for this. Like YouTube, you should be able to like connect your Steam or whatever gaming library you have, and then YouTube can check that you actually have given game, but given game. So I think there are solutions we can look for here.
Initiative to enforce that. That means the government has to build a registry of all of those games and all of that intellectual property that shouldn't be monetized, and then somehow enforce that with no one owning it because those studios have shut down. That's going to be a massive burden.
Like if a server binary released, then there is going to be a bunch of private servers. And usually speaking, there is always a few private servers that like top the market. There's always like a few private servers that are the biggest ones per se. So going after those specific private servers in a legal manner, I think it's not that, it does not seem unobtainable to me that like, to reach this goal, that we can do something legally against these. So I feel like Thor should be looking for a solution here again and not just critique this. It is good that he starts a conversation on this, because this is actually can be a real issue.
On top of that, if you want to go the other route and say the company has to go and control it, well, what if the company's not around anymore? Is that just able to be monetized now? Again, this was obtained through abuse of the original creator. I don't think that's a good route. And this scenario gets even worse if you do allow monetization, because now I can just kill off your company and then monetize the server and no one will ever come after me. Now it's...
That's why we need law to prevent this. That's why we need the laws and build walls around these things to protect the developers for this. And those are things that could be easily included into this initiative, because it is just a raw draft. It is not the law, it is not the final product. This is something that Thor could like help them with. That's what I don't get. Why isn't he doing that?
It's even more of a problem. So allowing monetization of this work is strictly worse. And for those of you out there that say, oh, this can be done right now, I could just destroy your studio and take your stuff anyway. You could, but this allows a route for it to be legal to do so. That's the problem.
But this is not going to allow them to be legal. I don't think he... Actually, I'm going to quote a comment from my YouTube comments from the first episode of this video. I don't think Thor knows actually how these EU initiatives work. I really don't think he does. Because, firstly, you make this raw draft, you make this thing, so you gather the signatures. And when you have the signatures, then you have 3 months to draft the final version of this that you are going to present to the EU Commission, that you're going to present to the EU lawmakers. And then they are going to look through it. And after that, there is another conversation starting where they are going to look into it and where they are starting to come up with ideas and draft it more and more and more. So there is so much like level to this to implement changes, and there's definitely going to be changes, because even if it in its current form goes in front of the EU Commission, they are going to change a bunch of things, and they are going to involve experts in this to make it as fair as possible for both the developers and both the customers. They are not just going to accept this as it is written and put it out there. That's never going to happen. That was not even in the cards.
Putting this out publicly and talking to people about it, this specific scenario on both YouTube and Discord and Reddit and a bunch of other locations, I got a couple of takes back. We're going to start with the most extreme position and kind of go from there. So, in the most extreme, people said live service games shouldn't exist at all, and the initiative will kill them off for good, and that's a good thing. Well, you don't get to define what players get to play or not play. You also...
I mean, the customers get to decide what players play and won't play in the first place, not the developers. And the developers are always going to have to follow what sells and what does not sell.
Also shouldn't be able to get to define what developers build or don't build. You should not have creative control over the developers, and you...
Yeah, you should not have, but you do have. Because developers can develop anything, but if it's not going to sell, they are just going to go bankrupt. At the end of the day, the customer's needs and wants is the thing that dictates the market. That is the thing that dictates the market. You have to work and do things that is going to sell.
You should not have control over what is in my Steam library or on my phone. That doesn't make any goddamn sense. Aside from that, the initiative does not purport to kill live service games. It would just make it incredibly difficult to build said games and add a lot of risk to it, which is why I'm bringing all of this up and why I don't support the initiative in the first place. A lot of people don't realize that this will slowly diminish live service games in the market, because it's not an incentive for us to build them anymore, which means you get less multiplayer live experiences. That sucks. I like live service games. I enjoy playing things like Final Fantasy XIV. I enjoy going and playing in games in the past, at least, like League of Legends. These are games that are live service. They require a live service to run, and you shouldn't be able to take that away from people. And if that's your only position on this, not only are you disingenuous in what the initiative is purporting to try to achieve, but you're also aggressively attacking other players instead of trying to fix something. So the next one is that this is...
But this is exactly what I can say to Thor as well. Instead of trying to fix the initiative, he is just straight up doing the same thing and attacking it. Instead of drafting this up, drafting solutions for it, and start a conversation with it. Not, it's like, how should I say this? He's acting like if I have like a car and there's like something that can be fixed on it or something, he does not want to fix it, he just want to throw it away and buy a new car, basically. But what if we try to fix the thing first, instead of just straight up saying that this does not work, get a new one? What if we fix this and find solution together for this? Because it is a raw draft, like I said before. There's many things that can and will be added to this whole thing when it becomes a law. And in the process of it becoming a law, or in the process of it getting in front of the EU Commission and the EU lawmakers. So there is so many steps that we are behind to talk about this like this.
About games preservation, and that it needs to happen to preserve these types of games for future generations,
yes,
and for everyone to always have forever. But I would argue that this isn't actually preserving these games. Social games, such as, let's say, Apex Legends, require a number of players to be in the match at the same time, so you can have an experience that is only able to be obtained through lots of players interacting, right? It's a multiplayer game, you need a bunch of people. How many of you have felt negatively when an MMO dies? Or when a live service game dies? Oh, yeah. Dead game. There's only 5 people online, why would I play that? So why would you want to preserve a game in that state? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes, but this is talked about too. That there is going to have some common sense that goes into this, because there are live service games that just cannot function on low player numbers, that cannot function in general. For example, good examples that Rose brings up is Microsoft Flight Simulator. There is no way in hell anyone is going to get that many data for a server to run Microsoft Flight Simulator after it shuts down. There's just no way. It's just way too much work, way too much data in general. And for example, other example that Ross brings up is EVE Online. There is no like Minecraft server that you can rent that is going to be able to handle tens of thousands of players. There's just none. There's none. So there has to be some common sense involved in this conversation here. There are games that is not going to function like that. Like Apex Legends is not going to function with 6 players. You're not going to play against bots. That's not the point. But if Apex only have 6 players left, then there is no point keeping the game alive. And that is included in this voting already. And in general, in games that require a bunch of people, like League, like Apex, if these games are at that point where the crew is, that there is only 6 players left that plays them daily, there is not going to be a need for it anyways.
You want to take down these live service games, put them up on a private server, and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense. That's not preservation. And for those...
Yes, but this is not even what we were talking about. And for example, even if it's like not profitable for the game studio to run servers, like for the game that I really like, Warhammer Age of Reckoning, it still runs to this day on the private server. Now that's kind of the official server at this point because they are making content for it too. But it has like daily a few thousand players, like 1 to 2k, maybe 3k players a day. That's all they have. But that is a really small community size that would not be worth for a studio to run. But to run it as a private server, it's still worth it, and to keep it up from like donations and such things, you know, because there are no pay to win nothing like that in the game. It is literally just run from donations, and that is fair. That is something that is preservation. That is like a good example as how this should be. But you're not going to run on Apex Legends on 1000 player. Like a game that used to have like the top 500 as the Apex Predators are not going to run with 1000 players. That would not make sense. And that is the important thing here. That this is only applies to games that would make sense to run at a low player number too.
that may stop there and go, but private servers going to have a lot of players. Look at all the ones for World of Warcraft. Again, we talked about that. It opens up a route for abuse of the developers, so that is not a solution. And the last take that I got from this is, and it's the most reasonable to me, this is an initiative, it's not a law. Why are you upset? Just wait. I'm not going to wait. And the reason I'm not going to wait is because I see the start of this conversation not making sense. It's not including the actual developer side of the conversation. It's not showing the trials and problems that this could arise inside of the gaming industry for people who are actually making the games you play. I don't have any reason to be quiet about that. And many other developers aren't going to be able to speak on this. As I explained before, it's really easy to lose your job if you're working at a major studio and try to speak out of turn on something like this, especially with something people are so passionate about. Doesn't make any sense to stay quiet. And it also doesn't make any sense to wait until it's in a different form when I see that it has so many problems with the language as it is currently.
But then list those problems with the language, try to find correct solutions to it, or just solutions or advices, and send it to them. Because it is in a stage where things can be changed, things can be adjusted, and the discussion is still ongoing. You cannot shut down something when you didn't even join the discussion. That's my main problem with this whole thing. And now I see why people were upset with Thor. I really do. Although I love the guy, but goddamn.
Written. I should be able to be talking about this. In fact, I should be talking about this.
Yeah, obviously.
I'm a content creator specifically that is a game developer that has worked in this industry for 20 years. This is my wheelhouse. This is what I do. So for those who are calling for me to just be silent and sit in the corner,
no, he doesn't have to.
With all of that being said, I do think there's a consumer protection thing that we can fix here. It's just not really what the initiative is about. I think that if you're going to buy a live service game, you shouldn't be told you're buying the game. You shouldn't be told that you're purchasing the game.
See, this is constructive.
Purchasing a license to that game. The reason
Yeah.
why is because that license needs to be revoked
Yes.
anytime that you are cheating at the game and damaging the play experience.
No,
of other
obviously,
players.
that's
While
fair.
this is written in the TOS and the EULA, it's usually not clearly defined at point of sale. Or they throw
Yes.
a giant TOS in front of you and it doesn't really do anything because people skip past it. If at point of sale it says specifically, there's specific language stating that you are either leasing or purchasing a license or anything along those lines, that you're not actually buying the game directly, I think it would go a long way to informing consumers of what they're doing and protect them from some of these business practices that they didn't realize they were engaging in. That makes a lot more sense to me than force all developers to leave the game in a functional, playable state. And that's about it.
Yeah.
That's all I really wanted to talk about with this. I hope that's clarified some things for some of you and some of the dangers that this can cause as it is currently written. If you're still mad about this, not much I can do about it. Outside of that, I'm going to be gone for the next 4 days, so if you expect me to respond or anything like that and you think I'm ducking the issue or hiding in some way, I'm not. I'm just in Vegas because there's DEF CON going on, which is a hacking convention, and it's the first vacation I've had in 5 years. I can't wait to see my friends out there. So with that in mind, see y'all later.
So let's sum this up. So I think what Thor says about like live service games is fair, because this can open a way for abuse. So people shut down developers, take their stuff and try to monetize it on their own. That is something to be worried about, and that is something we should talk about, and that is something important to talk about. And I understand that Thor has problem with this, and this is maybe the main example and the main problem with the voting that I can see too. But the initiative is not the final version. It is just a road draft. There is going to be much more changes that going into this, and that is why this should be included. This should be talked about. This should be something that Thor helps with and come up with like a framework where we can protect the developers from this happening, really. And there should be walls put up against these. And as I said before, developers already have protection against some of these things, like bots, exploits, and all that. They have anti-cheat and all that things. So they already have the first defensive layer against this. Now, if we add more layers to this with law and legislation, and maybe even sanctions against these kind of private servers, that it makes not worth to do, then that can be a really good deterrent for these people to not even try to do this, because the cost that would come with this and the inconvenience that would come with this is just not worth their time and money to put into this. For example, that is important to mention here too. If a game like League of Legends dies, or Apex dies like this that Thor mentioned, the community is already dead and don't want to play anymore, basically. So keeping up a private server from this is kinda like, what do you want to do with like 6 people left? It's not even worth to keep it up. So I think that is something that is important to include too. That if you kill a game like that, there might not even be a player base to steal at that point. Overall, I feel like this is something that should be included to defend developers in this way, and to have more legal walls around the developers. So this is something that cannot happen. And as I mentioned before, this war initiative is just road draft. It is vague technically, but it is vague for legal reasons and bargaining reasons. So they have more space to work with, more space to move when they bargain with like developers and the war conversations goes forward. So that's why they need this space, as Ross explained it in his video. I'm going to link that in the description too, next to Thor's. It is important to get the full context. Okay, so all that said, I do think, and like I said, I'm going to sign the initiative because it's good and this should be worked on, and it is a good start for this. And I do feel like Thor should involve himself in this more and not just straight up reject the idea and throw it away instead of trying to fix it, because this is the time where conversation can flourish and we can fix it and we can make it so developers and consumers are both satisfied with this whole thing. We can get rid of predatory practices, we could get way more things in here, we could get some protection there for the developers too, because it should include that as well. But then let's talk about it and let's include ourselves in it and not just straight up reject the whole idea and push it to the side. That is basically my opinion on this, after everything that I heard and read. Okay, and now let's talk about what I want to add to this, because I have a few ideas to add to this to get rid of some predatory practices. Firstly, I would like in gacha games when you have those things where it's like something like here that says free, and then it goes towards something. There is another free version, so I'm just going to put F here, which goes to something that costs like $4, like $4.99 or something. It goes into this, and after you paid, it says again that the next thing is free. This is not free! You already paid for it. And this just goes for more and more and more, and they have these in games. Like, this is something that the initiative should protect people against you. I feel like the initiative should have a section where they get rid of some of these kinds of predatory practices that some of the mobile games and other games do. Because this is not okay. This is not okay at all. And other stuff that is, I think, important to include with this whole predatory practices thing is when game developers are making the game artificially harder or the grind in a game artificially longer to sell stuff to you. That is really damn predatory in a way. So those kinds of things are other things that I would include. There should be some restrictions on these predatory practices that some game developers, especially free-to-game developers and gacha games and all that do. I think that is something should be included as well. And my second point is that developers should realize that Eastern Europe does not make as much money as Western Europe. I know we are both part of the European Union, but boy, our minimum wage in Eastern Europe is a few times less than someone's minimum wage in Germany. So, making an Eastern European pay the same amount of money for cosmetics, for games, for in-game whatever, microtransactions, than someone from Germany, from West Europe, from the US, where they make more money in general. That is, I think, ridiculous, and this is something that should be included in an initiative like this too. Because I think this is something that can kill games as well. Because there is a reason Eastern Europe is like the, I don't even know what, like the heaven or whatever I can say, like the promised land, the paradise for torrenting and pirating games. It is exactly because of this reason. Because most Eastern Europeans do not have $70 goddamn from their $500 minimum wage to buy each and every game without trying it out. That is why pirating and piracy rampant in these parts of the world. And these parts of like Europe, Eastern Europe. Like in Hungary, bro, everyone pirates everything. Literally. You're literally losing customers with it. So I think this is something that's important towards keeping games alive too. Because you are losing a bunch of paying customers just because they cannot pay that much. But they would be able to pay like $35 for the game, like half of it, or 80% of it, or whatever. But if it's less, you're going to gain more customers that buy the game instead of torrenting it. So I think that is something that would be important to include too. That Eastern Europe is not the same payment and pay power wise, or whatever they call that, as Western Europe or the US. Okay, thank you all for watching. Leave a like, leave a dislike again. Oh god. It's going to be a bunch of dislikes again. But I mean, I'm just trying to keep the conversation going. So that's the most important part, I think. Especially it's engagement too. So it just gets to more people. I did my research and did my homework. So I think I have a better understanding on the voting. And that is why, as I said before, I'm going to sign the initiative. I have to get to that too, but I had way too much stuff to do today, and I already recorded this video once. But I forgot to turn on my microphone. And it's hot in here, because I cannot turn on my EC. Because I'm recording, and it's kinda loud. So yeah. Okay. Again, leave a like, leave a comment, leave a dislike, whichever you want. Let's keep the conversation going. That's the main thing. See you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and bye-bye. Easy on!